The early evening news now on BBC One with Simon McCoy.
Why we must save the planet from climate change this century, a stark warning from the United Nations. Unless we stop using fossil fuels almost entirely, it says the world faces severe, pervasive and irreversible damage.
Science has spoken. There is no ambiguity in their message. Leaders must act. Time is not on our side.
Also on the programme, a 29-year-old British man will appear in court in Hong Kong tomorrow in connection with the deaths of 2 women found dead in his flat. Islamic State militants are accused of the mass murder of more than 50 members of a Sunni tribe, including women and children, in western Iraq. Remembering Alice, the parents of murdered schoolgirl Alice Gross speak of their huge loss at an emotional memorial service for their daughter. And City are the pass masters as they claim bragging rights in the Manchester derby. Good evening. The world faces a severe, widespread and irreversible impact on its climate unless greenhouse gas emissions are all but eliminated by the end of the century. The dramatic warning comes from the United Nations, which is recommending a complete end to the burning of fossil fuels such as coal. The UN has looked at 30,000 pieces of the latest research data in reaching its conclusion that we have to radically alter the way our energy needs are met if we're to avoid global temperatures rising by more than 2 degrees by the year 2100. Here's our science editor, David Schuckman.
In the deserts of western China, a desperate attempt to hold back the sands. According to today's report, climate change will be felt in many different ways. Some people, like here, will try to cope. Others, especially the poorest, will have the hardest time adapting. The evidence, the report says, is mounting from every region on the planet, from the melting of the ice in the Arctic to the effect on the rise of sea level. This issue has become a personal cause for the Secretary-General of the United Nations, and he launched this new publication.
Science has spoken. There is no ambiguity in their message. Leaders must act. Time is not on our side.
The report lays out the potential impacts of climate change and options for tackling it. And the most controversial is that fossil fuels like coal should be phased out by the end of the century. That would be a huge undertaking because fossil fuels generate about 2/3 of the world's electricity. The report says they should only be used if the carbon dioxide they emit is captured in plants like this one. But this technology is in its very earliest days. With fossil fuels providing the backbone of the global power supply, every attempt to negotiate a new treaty on greenhouse gases always failed. Most recently, 5 years ago. Economic pressures and national politics intervened. Now the UN will try again in Paris next year. But has anything really changed?
We are seeing countries previously who refused to take action now taking action. We're seeing countries who refused to really even negotiate on this issue now coming to the table. So the politics of climate change in the UK, in Europe and around the world is changing.
This afternoon, a reminder of the danger of extreme weather. A tornado tore through the town of Colville in Leicestershire.
They keep saying the weather's changing in the country and that, and you just don't know what to expect these days, you know, because there's no seasons no more.
And the dirt storm has hit.
A dust storm during a record drought in Oklahoma last summer. Scientists say extremes are set to become more likely as emissions of carbon dioxide keep rising. They've made their conclusions very clear. Now we'll see how governments respond.
Well, David Schuckman joins me now. We've heard this before, another dramatic warning.
Indeed. I mean, year after year, these reports, they come out with apparently the same warning. Generally, the language gets more strident. Those warnings become tougher. The idea of urgency becomes more intense. But as you suggested, I mean, governments receive these documents, nod politely, and most of them don't do much about it. If you look at the 2 biggest emitters in the world, America, well, for domestic political reasons, it's never chosen to do a great deal on this. And China, the world's biggest emitter, has always said, well, look, we're a developing country with a growing economy. Don't try to tell us what to do.
And how much are we going to have to change what we do here in the UK?
Well, Britain in many ways has set something of a pace here. The first country to have an act that set out a very ambitious set of cuts in carbon emissions over the coming decades. Now, whether that's achievable is another question, because you're talking about an enormous shift in how the country gets its power. Right now, about 2/3 of our electricity comes from burning coal and gas. Changing that in the course of the next 30, 40 years is going to be a massive undertaking.
David, thank you very much. A British man will appear in court in Hong Kong tomorrow in connection with the murders of 2 women. The man is understood to be 29-year-old Rurik Jutting, a former employee of Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Police found the victims at his apartment. The body of one of the women was in a suitcase. I should warn you that Juliana Liu's report contains some flash photography.
This is BBC One. Now the Sunday night news with Simon McCoy.
A stark warning from the United Nations tonight: act now on climate change. Unless we stop using fossil fuels almost entirely, it says the world faces severe and irreversible damage.
Science has spoken. There is no ambiguity in their message. Leaders must act. Time is not on our side.
We'll be assessing whether or not the report's aims are achievable. Also tonight, German Chancellor Angela Merkel warns David Cameron his immigration policies are leading Britain closer to a European exit. A 29-year-old British man will appear in court in Hong Kong tomorrow in connection with the deaths of 2 women found in his flat. And City are the past masters as they claim bragging rights in the Manchester derby. Good evening. The world faces a severe, widespread and irreversible impact on its climate unless greenhouse gas emissions are all but eliminated by the end of the century. This dramatic warning comes from the United Nations, which is recommending an almost complete end to the burning of fossil fuels such as coal. The UN has looked at 30,000 pieces of the latest research data in reaching its conclusion that we have to radically alter the way our energy needs are met if we're to avoid global temperatures rising by more than 2 degrees by the year 2100. Here's our science editor, David Shookman.
Coal blasted out of a mountain in West Virginia and gouged out of the ground in Germany. Fossil fuels like these remain the backbone of modern economic life. But today's report says burning them gives off so much carbon dioxide that extreme warming becomes far more likely. And for the UN Secretary-General, this has become a personal cause.
Science has spoken. There is no ambiguity in their message. Leaders must act. Time is not on our side.
The report lays out the potential impacts of climate change and options for tackling it. And the most controversial is that fossil fuels like coal should be phased out by the end of the century. That would be a huge undertaking because fossil fuels generate about 2/3 of the world's electricity. The report says they should only be used if the carbon dioxide they emit is captured in plants like this one. But this technology is in its very earliest days. Over the years, the UN Climate Panel has repeatedly warned about the impact of fossil fuels on the future temperature and the risk of an increase of more than 2 degrees Celsius, but never as starkly as now.
In the absence of carbon capture and storage, then power generation from fossil fuels would need to be phased out by the end of this century if we want to maintain the 2 degree Celsius limit of temperature increase.
But fossil fuels are central to our lives. This forest of oil pumps is in California. Every attempt to negotiate a global treaty to cut greenhouse gases has failed, most recently 5 years ago. Economic pressures and national politics have always intervened. The UN will try again in Paris next year, but has anything really changed?
We are seeing countries previously who refused to take action now taking action. We're seeing countries who refused to really even negotiate on this issue now coming to the table. So the politics of climate change in the UK, in Europe and around the world is changing.
In the deserts of western China, a desperate attempt to hold back the sands. According to today's report, even if there are big cuts to greenhouse gases, climate change will be felt in many different ways. And while some people will cope, others will have a much harder time adapting.
Well, David is with me now. Just how realistic are these aims?
At face value, totally unrealistic. If you think of the importance to the big global powers, China, America, India, European Union, of burning coal and gas, well, that's not going to change overnight or even in the space of a few years. On the other hand, you can see a few interesting developments in China. The rise of the middle class, unhappy about dirty air caused by burning coal, and that's leading to change. President Obama has announced plans for tough controls on pollution from the power stations. That could, in due course, make a difference. Also, investors, some, are pulling their money out of fossil fuels because they don't think it has a future. Now, that, of course, could gather momentum as well or go the other way. Which way overall will this go? I'm afraid it's too early to tell.
David, thank you very much. David Schuckman. The German Chancellor Angela Merkel is reported tonight to have made critical comments about David Cameron's approach to EU migration. Let's cross to Westminster. We can speak to our political correspondent Ian Watson. And Ian, what's she been saying?
Well, according to the report, Simon, in Der Spiegel magazine, the German news magazine, she's been suggesting that Britain...
That's after the ITV News.
Virgin Galactic categorically denies it cut corners on safety. As investigations continue into Friday's crash, Virgin's boss says he'll still go into space.
I would not be happy to invite passengers on our flights unless myself and my children are willing to go on it.
Also on the programme, Germany's warning to Cameron. His stance on EU migration could push Britain out of Europe. The UN says the world must phase out fossil fuels or face serious consequences. And Derby Kings City beat United for the 4th time in a row.
This is ITV News with James Mates.
Good evening. Virgin Galactic tonight categorically denied suggestions that safety warnings went unheeded before the fatal crash of Sir Richard Branson's rocket plane. The company told ITV News that safety guided every decision we have made while trying to develop space tourism. As Robert Moore reports from California, investigators say it will take some time to establish what caused the crash.
In this barren desert close to Death Valley, is this now the graveyard of the effort to make space both accessible and affordable? As the investigators examine the wreckage and the telemetry, critics have said this was an accident waiting to happen, a case of passion before precaution. But Sir Richard Branson, who has declared that both he and his children will be on the inaugural flight, told me that has not changed.
I would not be happy to invite passengers on our flights unless myself and my children are willing to go on it. So once the test pilots have properly tested the program and once the FAA have certified the spaceship, yes, then we'll be happy to fly and in fact would look forward to flying.
But the loss of this experienced pilot, Michael Alsbury, seen here in this promotional video of Virgin Galactic's Top Guns, is a significant blow to the project. Sir Richard said Michael would not want the team to give up.
He committed his life to being a test pilot, and you know that's no solace for his wife or his friends or his brothers or his sisters. But we've just got to push on to prove that his life was worthwhile and that it wasn't wasted.
When you come out here and see the wreckage scattered over miles of open desert, it makes you wonder whether Virgin Galactic can ever turn the space business into viable tourism. For these are images that will linger, and if the dream has not been abandoned, it has certainly been deferred. For even before the engineers can fix the problem, the investigators must establish the cause, and that won't be quick.
I wouldn't be surprised if it would take up to 12 months for us to come out with a final report.
Some have suggested that in the race to be first, and after so many frustrating delays, the culture of safety had been sacrificed.
I would never pretend to know what went wrong. What I do know is that people were worried. People who were very involved with the program were worried about the level of risk that was being taken and about the pace of the program and the pressure that they were feeling.
Virgin Galactic have hit back tonight, saying that while pushing the boundaries of flight technology will always involve risk, safety is, as they put it, the company's North Star. Robert Moore, ITV News, in the Mojave Desert.
David Cameron has been warned by Germany that his efforts to curb migration from the EU could lead to Britain's exit from Europe. Angela Merkel has said she would not work to help the UK stay in if it limits freedom of movement. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is at Westminster tonight. Carl, this is pretty strong language coming out of Berlin. Is this a warning the Prime Minister's going to have to heed?
Yes, I think it is. You can't have a warning shot like this from one of Europe's biggest guns and ignore it. And already there are signs that the Prime Minister is altering course because of this. Sources from Mrs. Merkel's office told the Der Spiegel magazine in Germany that she was concerned that Britain was approaching the point of no return on Europe. But she also said that she wouldn't continue to support Britain's membership of the EU if it went on undermining the principle of freedom of movement. Now, there are already signs that the number 10, of course, under huge pressure on immigration from UKIP, are taking notice that one idea to have quotas on low-skilled workers has been torn up. Number 10 are said to be looking for something more German compliant, focusing on the workers' side of freedom of movement, perhaps only allowing people into the country if they already have a job. It's a difficult balancing act for David Cameron to strike.
Carl, thank you very much indeed. Alistair Darling, the former Chancellor who led the Better Together campaign in the Scottish referendum, is to stand down as an MP at the next election. Mr Darling, who represented Edinburgh's South West, was Chancellor under Gordon Brown when the global banking crisis erupted in 2007. The world will suffer irreversible consequences unless global warming is tackled soon, according to a major report out tonight. It says human influence must take the blame for climate change and that time is running out to put it right. Here's our science correspondent, Alok Jha.
It's hard to ignore the impact of a changing climate when the evidence appears on your doorstep. Britain was lashed by unprecedented storms earlier this year. Climate change affects the whole world, of course. In the Arctic, the ice has been melting at an ever-increasing rate. Our reliance on fossil fuels is to blame. Those are the conclusions of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which today launched the most comprehensive report ever on the evidence for the state of our planet.
Science has spoken. There is no ambiguity in their message. Leaders must act. Time is not on our side.
Scientists are 95% certain that humans are driving the change in our climate. To avoid dangerous climate change, we need to end greenhouse gas emissions from power stations by the end of the century. If we continue increasing emissions at current rates, the world will be up to 5 degrees C hotter on average by 2100.
By the end of the century, we reach either zero emissions of greenhouse gases or negative emissions, because that is the only way that we would have enough assurance to limit temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius. And of course, we can't wait much longer, because if we want to get there, then we have to start immediately.
The UK government said it was a leader on climate change, but couldn't act alone.
I think it means that we've got to work with the rest of the world ever more closely. The Americans, the Chinese, the Indians. This is a world problem. Britain can't do it by itself. Yes, we're leading the way, but it's the international cooperation that's now going to be key.
Today's report is the last big chance the scientists have to make the unequivocal case that climate change is happening. It's up to politicians now to take that evidence and turn it into action. People are causing climate change, but according to the scientists, people also have the solutions. Alok Jha, ITV News.
A British man is to appear in court.
Now, the United Nations has warned that time is running out to reverse the effects of climate change. In the biggest report of its kind, UN experts say that the world faces irreversible damage unless fossil fuels are phased out by the end of the century. Lisa Holland has the details.
As the world hots up, thousands of scientists have been chronicling just how much time is left if the planet is to be saved from catastrophic change. Their work is being dubbed a climate change Bible, put together to pitch to politicians what action must be taken to protect the fragility of the ecosystem.
This clearly shows that we have a very limited window of opportunity, and I think the global community must look at these numbers and show the resolve by which we can bring about change.
Carbon emissions, mainly from burning coal, oil and gas, are currently rising to record levels, not falling. The report concludes that greener electricity is the key to tackling climate change. It says most of the world's electricity must and can be produced by low-carbon sources by 2050. Renewable energy will have to grow to an 80% share of the power sector, and fossil fuels should be phased out entirely by the next century.
If greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise at the current rate, we face the prospect of a rising global average temperature of about 5 degrees or more by the end of the century, which is something the Earth hasn't seen for tens of millions of years and would completely transform the planet. Sea levels would start rising by several meters. There'd be shifts in extreme weather. It would disrupt the lives of hundreds of millions, if not billions of people around the world.
At the Eureka Children's Museum in Halifax, they're learning through interactive exhibitions what climate change can mean.
It's usually very cold round here, but lately it feels like it's getting warmer.
And even from a young age, what they can do to help.
If you're not in a room or if you go out, you don't want to leave the telly on or anything because that wastes electricity.
But the children's parents believe it's governments who can make the real difference.
I think it's really important, and if we teach children how to do it, then obviously it has a bigger impact in the future. Although globally is a bit of a different matter because there's a lot of nations that aren't doing their bit.
With the deadline for a global deal just over a year away, the report comes at a critical time for debate on climate change. Its authors say if there is a will, there is a way to safeguard the planet and its inhabitants. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
I'll have sport for you in a moment. Rob Curling has more on what's coming up. Rob.